Welcome to Lunar Reflections, where we slow down, think deeper, and rediscover what truly matters in life. If you're tired of chasing things that don't fulfill you, this channel is for you. Make sure to subscribe and be part of a space that values meaning over noise. Now, let's begin. In every human relationship, words and actions carry weight. They shape how we understand one another, build trust, and create a sense of belonging. Words can comfort, encourage, and inspire, but they can also wound, divide, and discourage. Actions, likewise, speak volumes, sometimes even louder than words. A simple gesture of support can mean everything to someone in need, while the absence of action can leave a lasting void. In social relationships, especially those built on trust and mutual care, people expect not only kindness, but also presence both in voice and in action when it matters most. Throughout life, we inevitably encounter both supporters and critics. It is natural to face opposition from those who disagree with us or even wish us harm. Their words, though sometimes harsh, are often expected. We learn to prepare for them, to defend ourselves, or to simply ignore them. However, what truly shapes our emotional memory is not always the hostility we face from adversaries, but rather the response or lack thereof from those we consider allies. This idea is captured powerfully in the words of Martin Luther King Jr. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. This statement invites us to reconsider what truly leaves a lasting mark on our hearts and minds. At first glance, it may seem logical to assume that the most painful experiences come from direct attacks, insults, criticism, or betrayal from those who oppose us. After all, negative words can cut deeply, especially when they are aimed directly at our identity or values. Yet, as this quote suggests, those moments are not what we remember most vividly over time. Instead, it is the silence, the absence of support, the lack of defense, the failure to speak up that lingers. This silence is not neutral. It carries meaning. It signals indifference, fear, or even quiet agreement with wrongdoing. And when it comes from friends, people we trust and rely on, it can be far more devastating than any insult from an enemy. The pain of silence from friends stems from broken expectations. Friendship is built on the belief that someone will stand by you, especially in difficult moments. When that expectation is not met, it creates a sense of abandonment. Imagine facing a challenging situation, being unfairly criticized, excluded, or treated unjustly, and looking around for support, only to find none from those you thought would be there. In that moment, the absence of their voice becomes louder than any negative words spoken by others. It raises questions. Why didn't they say anything? Did they not care? Were they afraid? Or worse, did they agree? These unanswered questions deepen the emotional impact, making the silence more painful than direct confrontation. Moreover, silence in such situations often reflects a lack of courage. Speaking up, especially against injustice or wrongdoing, can be difficult. It may involve risk, discomfort, or conflict. Many people choose silence because it feels safer, because they want to avoid tension, or because they believe it is not their place to intervene. However, this choice has consequences. Silence can enable harmful behavior to continue unchecked. It can make the person suffering feel isolated and unsupported. In this way, silence is not merely the absence of words. It becomes a form of passive participation in the situation. In contrast, even a small act of support, a few words of encouragement, and a gesture of solidarity can make a significant difference. It reassures someone that they are not alone, that their experience matters, and that someone is willing to stand with them. This is why the absence of such support is so noticeable and memorable. Over time, people may forget the exact words that were said against them, but they rarely forget how they felt when no one came to their defense. This idea also extends beyond personal relationships into broader social contexts. In communities and societies, progress often depends on individuals who are willing to speak out against injustice. History has shown that silence in the face of wrongdoing can allow harmful systems to persist. When people remain silent, whether out of fear or indifference, they unintentionally contribute to the problem. On the other hand, those who choose to speak up even when it is difficult help create change and uphold shared values of fairness and humanity. Ultimately, this quote challenges us to reflect on our own behavior. It asks us not only to consider how we respond when we are hurt, but also how we respond when others are in need. Are we the kind of person who speaks up, or do we remain silent? Do we offer support when it matters, or do we step back to avoid discomfort? These questions are essential because they define the kind of relationships we build and the kind of society we help create. In the end, words do matter, but so does silence. And sometimes, silence speaks the loudest of all. To fully understand the depth of this quote, it is important to break down its key components and examine the meaning behind each phrase. The statement, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends," attributed to Martin Luther King Jr., is not simply a reflection on conflict. It is a profound observation about human relationships, expectations, and emotional impact. First, the phrase "the words of our enemies" refers to the criticism, hostility, or attacks that come from those who oppose us. These enemies do not necessarily have to be literal adversaries. They can be anyone who disagrees with us, challenges us, or even seeks to undermine us. Their words may come in the form of insults, accusations, rejection, or public criticism. While such words can certainly be hurtful, they are often not surprising. In many cases, we anticipate negativity from people who do not support us. Because of this expectation, we tend to develop a certain level of emotional preparedness. We may brace ourselves, build defenses, or learn to dismiss their opinions altogether. Moreover, the words of enemies are usually clear and direct. They express opposition openly, leaving little ambiguity about where the speaker stands. This clarity, paradoxically, can make such words easier to process over time. When someone openly criticizes or opposes us, we understand the nature of the relationship. There is no illusion of support, no expectation of loyalty. As a result, while their words may sting in the moment, they often lose their emotional intensity as time passes. We come to accept that not everyone will agree with us, and we learn to move forward despite their negativity. In contrast, the phrase "the silence of our friends" carries a much deeper and more complex emotional weight. Friends, by definition, are people we trust, rely on, and expect to stand by us, especially in difficult moments. Friendship implies a sense of mutual support, understanding, and loyalty. When we face challenges, whether personal or social, we naturally look to our friends for reassurance and defense. Their presence, both in words and actions, serves as a source of strength. However, when those friends choose to remain silent in moments when their support is needed, that silence becomes deeply significant. It is not simply the absence of words, it is a powerful form of communication. Silence in this context can suggest indifference, hesitation, fear, or even quiet agreement with the opposing side. Unlike the clear hostility of an enemy, silence is ambiguous. It leaves us questioning motives and intentions. Did they stay quiet because they were afraid? Because they didn't care? Or because they didn't truly support us in the first place? This ambiguity intensifies the emotional impact. When someone openly criticizes us, we know where they stand. But when a friend says nothing, we are left to interpret their silence, often filling in the gaps with doubt and insecurity. This uncertainty can be more painful than direct confrontation because it undermines the foundation of trust. It forces us to reevaluate the relationship and reconsider what that friendship truly means. Furthermore, the silence of friends often feels like a form of betrayal, subtle but powerful. It is not an active attack, but rather a passive failure to act when action is needed. In many cases, this kind of betrayal is more difficult to process because it lacks a clear moment of conflict. There are no harsh words to point to, no explicit actions to confront. Instead, There is only the lingering memory of absence, the feeling that someone who should have been there simply wasn't. This is why the quote suggests that, in the end, it is this silence that we remember most vividly. Emotional memory is not only shaped by what happens to us, but also by what does not happen when it should. Moments of vulnerability, times when we feel exposed, judged, or wronged, are when we need support the most. If that support is not given, the impact is lasting. We may forget the specific criticisms we faced, but we remember the feeling of standing alone. At a deeper level, this idea highlights the difference between expected harm and unexpected disappointment. Harm from an enemy is expected. Disappointment from a friend is not. Expectations play a crucial role in how we experience and remember events. When expectations are met, even if negatively, we are less shaken. But when expectations are broken, especially by those we trust, the emotional consequences are far greater. Silence, in this sense, becomes a violation of the unspoken agreement that defines friendship. The overall meaning of the quote, therefore, lies in the idea that silent betrayal can be more painful than open opposition. While enemies may hurt us with their words, they do so from a position that we understand. Friends, on the other hand, have the power to either support or abandon us in meaningful ways. When they choose silence, it can feel like a denial of the relationship itself, a withdrawal of the very support that defines friendship. In addition, this quote subtly challenges the notion that neutrality is harmless. Many people believe that staying silent allows them to avoid conflict or remain impartial. However, in situations where someone is being treated unfairly or needs support, silence is rarely neutral. It can be perceived as complicity, as a failure to take a stand when it matters. This is especially true in close relationships, where silence carries more weight because of the emotional connection involved. Ultimately, the quote emphasizes a powerful truth about human experience. What hurts us most is not always direct harm, but the absence of care when we need it most. The silence of friends represents more than just inaction. It symbolizes missed opportunities for empathy, courage, and loyalty. It reminds us that relationships are defined not only by what we say, but also by what we choose not to say. In the end, the message is clear. While we may encounter many forms of negativity in life, it is the quiet moments, the ones where support should have been present but was not, that leave the deepest marks. One of the most compelling ideas behind this quote is the question of why the silence of friends leaves a deeper and more lasting impression than the harsh words of enemies. At the core of this issue lies the nature of trust, emotional dependence, and the expectations we place on the people closest to us. While criticism from opponents may hurt in the moment, it is often the quiet absence of support from friends that lingers in our memory and shapes how we view relationships moving forward. The first, and perhaps most significant reason, is the breaking of trust. Friendship is built on an unspoken agreement of loyalty, understanding, and mutual support. When we call someone a friend, we are not simply acknowledging shared experiences or casual companionship. We are placing a certain level of emotional trust in that person. We believe that, when faced with difficulty, they will stand beside us. This expectation is not always explicitly stated, but it is deeply felt. It becomes part of how we define friendship itself. When that expectation is broken, the impact can be profound. If a friend chooses to remain silent during a moment when we are being criticized, treated unfairly, or emotionally vulnerable, it can feel like a betrayal of that trust. The silence sends a message, whether intentional or not, that the bond we believed in may not be as strong as we thought. It forces us to question the authenticity of the relationship. Were they ever truly on my side? Did I misjudge their loyalty? These questions can be unsettling, and the answers are often unclear, which makes the experience even more difficult to process. Unlike direct conflict, where the issue is visible and can be addressed, broken trust caused by silence is subtle. There is no clear confrontation, no specific words to respond to. Instead, there is only an absence, an empty space where support should have been. This absence can quietly erode the foundation of a relationship, leaving behind a sense of disappointment that is hard to fully articulate but impossible to ignore. Over time, this feeling becomes part of our emotional memory, making the silence far more memorable than any external criticism. Closely tied to the loss of trust is the overwhelming feeling of loneliness that silence creates. Human beings are inherently social, and we seek connection, validation, and understanding from others. During difficult moments, this need becomes even stronger. When we are under pressure, facing injustice, or dealing with emotional pain, the presence of supportive voices can provide comfort and strength. Even a single word of encouragement can make a difference, reminding us that we are not alone. However, when that support does not come especially from those we expected, from the sense of isolation can intensify dramatically. It is not just that no one speaks up, it is that the people who matter most choose not to. This creates a powerful emotional contrast. On one side, there may be criticism or negativity from others. On the other, there is silence from friends. And in that silence, the individual may feel abandoned, exposed, and unsupported. This kind of loneliness is particularly painful because it occurs in the presence of others. It is one thing to feel alone when no one is around, but it is entirely different to feel alone when the people you trust are right there yet choose not to act. That experience can leave a lasting impression, shaping how a person approaches future relationships. They may become more guarded, less willing to rely on others, or more cautious in placing their trust. In this way, the silence of friends not only affects the present moment, but also influences future emotional connections. Another important factor that makes this silence so memorable is the deep emotional pain it causes. Silence, in these situations, is rarely interpreted as neutral. Instead, it is often seen as a reflection of indifference or a lack of courage. When a friend remains silent in the face of wrongdoing or injustice, it can feel as though they are choosing comfort over loyalty. They may be avoiding conflict, protecting their own interests, or simply unwilling to take a stand. Regardless of the reason, the effect is the same. Their silence is perceived as a failure to care enough to act. This perception can be incredibly hurtful. It suggests that the relationship may not hold the value we believed it did. It can also create a sense of emotional imbalance, where one person feels more invested than the other. The realization that someone we trust is unwilling to support us, especially when it matters most, can lead to feelings of disappointment, sadness, and even resentment. In addition, silence can sometimes feel more powerful than words because of what it implies. Words, even harsh ones, are finite. They are spoken, heard, and eventually fade. Silence, on the other hand, leaves room for interpretation. It allows the mind to fill in the gaps, often with worst-case assumptions. A person may begin to wonder whether their friend agrees with the criticism, whether they are ashamed to be associated with them, or whether they simply do not care. These interpretations can amplify the emotional impact, making the silence feel heavier and more significant than it might have been intended. Furthermore, silence can be seen as a missed opportunity for courage. Speaking up in difficult situations often requires bravery. It may involve going against the majority, risking conflict, or stepping out of one's comfort zone. When a friend chooses to remain silent instead, it can feel as though they are prioritizing their own safety over the relationship. This perception adds another layer of emotional pain, as it highlights not just the absence of support, but also the absence of courage. Ultimately, the reason the silence of friends is more memorable lies in its emotional complexity. It is not just about what did not happen, it is about what should have happened but did not. It represents a gap between expectation and reality, between trust and disappointment, between connection and isolation. These contrasts create a powerful emotional experience that is difficult to forget. Over time, people may move on from the words of their enemies. They may forgive, forget, or simply outgrow the negativity. But the silence of friends often leaves a deeper imprint because it touches on something more personal: the need for support, the value of trust, and the importance of being seen and heard by those who matter most. Beyond its personal and emotional significance, This quote also carries a powerful message about society as a whole. It challenges not only how individuals behave in private relationships, but also how people respond to injustice, wrongdoing, and moral dilemmas in the broader community. When Martin Luther King Jr. spoke about remembering the silence of our friends, he was pointing to a social reality. Progress and justice are not only hindered by those who do wrong, but also by those who choose not to act when they witness it. In this sense, the quote becomes a call to awareness, courage, and responsibility. First, the quote encourages people to speak up against what is wrong. In any society, there will always be situations where injustice, unfairness, or harmful behavior exists. These can take many forms: discrimination, bullying, corruption, or simple acts of cruelty. While it is easy to assume that responsibility lies solely with those who commit these acts, the reality is more complex. Social environments are shaped not only by actions, but also by reactions. When people witness wrongdoing and remain silent, they unintentionally allow it to continue. Speaking up, however, is not always easy. It often requires courage, especially when there is pressure to conform or stay quiet. People may fear being judged, rejected, or even punished for taking a stand. They may worry about damaging relationships or putting themselves in uncomfortable situations. As a result, many choose silence not because they agree with what is happening, but because they want to avoid conflict. Yet, this avoidance comes at a cost. It allows harmful behavior to persist and can make those affected feel isolated and unsupported. This is why the quote serves as a reminder that silence is not a neutral choice. In moments where something clearly wrong is taking place, choosing not to speak is, in effect, choosing not to help. It highlights the importance of moral courage, the willingness to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult. By encouraging individuals to use their voices, the quote promotes a culture where people actively contribute to fairness and justice, rather than passively observing it. At the same time, the quote offers a critique of indifference in society. One of the most troubling aspects of modern social dynamics is not always overt hostility, but rather widespread apathy. Indifference can be seen in everyday situations, such as when people witness bullying in schools and choose to look the other way. A student being teased, excluded, or harassed may not only be hurt by the aggressor, but also by the silence of classmates who see what is happening but do nothing. Their silence can reinforce the behavior, making it seem acceptable or unimportant. This pattern extends beyond schools into workplaces, communities, and even larger societal systems. In cases of injustice, whether related to inequality, discrimination, or abuse, there are often many people who are aware of the problem but choose not to act. They may feel that it is not their responsibility, that their voice will not make a difference, or that the issue is too complex to get involved in. However, when many individuals adopt this mindset, it creates an environment where harmful practices can continue unchecked. The quote challenges this kind of thinking by highlighting the consequences of silence. It suggests that indifference is not harmless. It has real effects on people's lives. When individuals remain silent in the face of injustice, they contribute to a culture where wrongdoing is tolerated. This, in turn, can discourage victims from speaking out, as they may feel that no one will support them. Over time, this cycle of silence and inaction can become deeply ingrained, making it even more difficult to create change. By drawing attention to this issue, the quote encourages people to move beyond passive observation and become active participants in their communities. It pushes individuals to ask themselves difficult questions. If I see something wrong, what should I do? Am I willing to speak up, even if it is uncomfortable? What kind of society do I want to be part of? These questions are essential because they shift the focus from individual comfort to collective responsibility. Another important social implication of the quote is its emphasis on moral responsibility. Every individual, regardless of their role or status, has a part to play in shaping the ethical standards of their community. Responsibility is not limited to leaders, authorities, or those directly involved in a situation. It extends to anyone who is aware of what is happening. In this sense, the quote reinforces the idea that being a member of a community comes with certain obligations not just to oneself, but to others as well. Moral responsibility involves more than simply avoiding harmful actions. It requires a willingness to act in support of what is right. This can take many forms, from speaking out against unfair treatment to offering support to those in need. Even small actions, such as expressing disagreement with harmful behavior or standing by someone who is being mistreated, can make a meaningful difference. These actions help create an environment where people feel valued, protected, and respected. Importantly, the quote does not suggest that speaking up will always be easy or without consequences. In many cases, it may involve risk or sacrifice. However, it emphasizes that the cost of silence can be even greater, not only for those who suffer from injustice, but also for the moral integrity of the individual and the health of society as a whole. A community where people consistently choose silence over action is one where trust, fairness, and accountability are weakened. Ultimately, the social meaning of this quote lies in its call for engagement. It urges individuals to recognize that their voices matter and that their choices whether to speak or remain silent have an impact. It highlights the interconnected nature of society, where the actions of one person can influence the experiences of others. By encouraging courage, criticizing indifference, and emphasizing responsibility, the quote provides a framework for building a more just and compassionate community. In the end, it reminds us that silence is never just silence. It is a choice, and that choice shapes the kind of world we live in. To fully grasp the meaning of this quote, it helps to look at real-life situations where the silence of friends becomes more painful than the words of enemies. These examples, whether in everyday life, in broader social or historical contexts, or in personal experiences, reveal how deeply this idea is woven into human behavior and memory. They show that the impact of silence is not abstract. It is something people encounter in very real and often painful ways. One of the most relatable examples can be found in everyday life, particularly in situations involving bullying. Imagine a student in a classroom who is being teased, mocked, or excluded by a group of peers. The aggressors are clearly in the wrong, and their words or actions are openly hurtful. However, what often leaves the deepest emotional scar is not just the behavior of the bullies, but the reaction or lack of reaction of those who witness it. Friends or classmates who see what is happening may choose to remain silent. They might look away, avoid getting involved, or pretend not to notice. For the person being targeted, this silence can feel like a second layer of harm. While the bully's actions are expected in a sense, they come from a place of hostility. The silence of friends is unexpected. The victim may think, "Why didn't anyone say anything? Why didn't my friends stand up for me?" Even a small act, like speaking up or offering support afterward, could make a difference. But when that support is absent, the individual may feel isolated, as though no one is willing to stand by them. Over time, they may forget the exact words the bully used, but they will remember who stayed silent when it mattered most. This dynamic is not limited to schools. It can be seen in workplaces, social groups, and even families. In any setting where one person is treated unfairly, the response of others plays a crucial role. Silence, in these cases, often reinforces the behavior of the aggressor. It sends an unspoken message that what is happening is acceptable, or at least not worth challenging. This is why silence can be so powerful and so damaging. Beyond everyday situations, history provides numerous examples of how silence can contribute to injustice on a much larger scale. There have been many moments when unfair systems or harmful practices persisted, not only because of those in power, but also because of the widespread silence of ordinary people. During times of social inequality or discrimination, there are often individuals who recognize that something is wrong but choose not to speak out. They may fear consequences, feel powerless, or believe that their voice will not make a difference. Yet, History has shown that collective silence can allow injustice to grow stronger. When people remain quiet, harmful systems face less resistance. This lack of opposition can make it easier for those in power to continue their actions without accountability. On the other hand, meaningful change often begins when individuals decide to break that silence. When people speak up, sometimes at great personal risk, they challenge the status quo and inspire others to do the same. This contrast highlights an important truth. Silence is not just a personal choice, it has social consequences. In many historical contexts, the absence of widespread opposition has been just as significant as the actions of those who caused harm. This idea reflects the message behind the words of Martin Luther King Jr., who emphasized the importance of speaking out against injustice. His perspective reminds us that progress depends not only on confronting those who do wrong, but also on encouraging those who witness it to take a stand. On a more personal level, the impact of silence can be felt in moments when individuals need emotional support but do not receive it. Consider a situation where someone is going through a difficult time, perhaps dealing with failure, loss, or a personal crisis. During these moments, people often turn to their friends for comfort and understanding. They may not expect solutions or perfect words, but they do expect presence, someone to listen, to acknowledge their struggle, and to show that they care. When that support is missing, the silence can feel overwhelming. A message left unanswered, a call not returned, or a lack of acknowledgement can create a sense of emotional distance. The person may begin to feel as though their struggles are invisible or unimportant. Even if their friends do not intend to cause harm, the absence of response can still have a powerful emotional effect. It can lead to feelings of rejection, disappointment, and loneliness. What makes these personal experiences particularly significant is their lasting impact. People tend to remember how they felt during vulnerable moments. If those moments are marked by silence from those they trust, it can shape how they approach relationships in the future. They may become more cautious, less open, or hesitant to rely on others. In this way, the silence of friends not only affects a single moment, but can influence long-term emotional patterns. Across all these examples, whether in daily life, historical events, or personal experiences, the same pattern emerges. The words or actions of those who oppose us may hurt, but they are often expected and easier to process over time. In contrast, the silence of those we trust creates a deeper and more complex emotional response. It challenges our expectations, weakens our sense of connection, and leaves us with unanswered questions. These examples make the message of the quote clear and tangible. They show that silence is not passive. It has meaning and consequences, whether it occurs in a classroom, a community, or a personal relationship. It shapes how people feel and how they remember their experiences. By recognizing this, we can better understand the importance of speaking up and offering support when it is needed. Ultimately, these real-life situations serve as a reminder that our presence both in words and in actions matters more than we might realize. Even small gestures of support can have a lasting impact, while silence, especially in critical moments, can leave a mark that is difficult to erase. The deeper we reflect on this quote, the clearer its practical lessons become. It is not merely an observation about human behavior, it is also a call to action. It challenges us to examine our own choices, especially in moments when speaking up feels uncomfortable, and to consider the kind of person we want to be in relation to others. From this perspective, several important life lessons emerge, each shaping how we approach relationships, responsibility, and moral courage. First and foremost, the quote encourages us to be the kind of person who is willing to speak up for what is right. In everyday life, there are countless situations where we are faced with a choice: remain silent or use our voice. These moments may not always be dramatic or life-changing. Sometimes they are small and seemingly insignificant. Witnessing unfair treatment, hearing someone being spoken about disrespectfully, or noticing that someone is being excluded. In these situations, it is often easier to stay quiet, to avoid involvement, or to assume that someone else will step in. However, Choosing to speak up even in small ways can have a powerful impact. It shows integrity, courage, and empathy. It communicates that we are not willing to ignore what is wrong simply because it is inconvenient to address. Speaking up does not always mean confronting others aggressively or creating conflict. It can be as simple as expressing support, offering a different perspective, or standing beside someone who feels alone. These actions may seem minor, but they carry meaning. They show that we are present, aware, and willing to take responsibility for the environment around us. At the same time, speaking up requires courage. It often involves stepping outside of our comfort zone and facing the possibility of disagreement or rejection. Many people remain silent not because they lack values, but because they fear the consequences of expressing them. They worry about damaging relationships, attracting criticism, or standing out in a way that feels uncomfortable. Yet, the quote reminds us that the cost of silence can be far greater than the discomfort of speaking. By staying quiet, we may protect ourselves in the short term, but we risk failing those who need support, and ultimately, we may carry the memory of that silence with us. Another key lesson is the importance of valuing and building genuine relationships. The quote highlights how deeply we are affected by the actions or inactions of those we trust. This means that the quality of our relationships matters. True friendship is not defined only by shared experiences or pleasant moments. It is tested in times of difficulty. A meaningful relationship is one where both individuals feel seen, supported, and valued, especially when it matters most. To build such relationships, we must be intentional. This involves being present, attentive, and willing to show up for others not just when it is easy, but also when it requires effort. It means listening when someone needs to be heard, offering encouragement when they feel discouraged, and standing by them when they face challenges. These actions create a sense of trust and reliability that strengthens the bond over time. Equally important is recognizing the kind of relationships we choose to invest in. If a relationship consistently lacks support, understanding, or mutual respect, it may not provide the foundation we need. The quote serves as a reminder that silence in critical moments reveals the true nature of a relationship. By paying attention to these moments, we can better understand who genuinely stands with us and who does not. This awareness allows us to build stronger, more authentic connections with people who share our values and are willing to act on them. Perhaps the most powerful lesson from this quote is the idea that silence in the face of injustice is not neutral. It can be a form of agreement. Many people believe that by staying silent, they are avoiding taking sides. They may see silence as the way to remain impartial or to avoid conflict. However, in situations where harm or unfairness is present, silence often benefits the wrong side. It allows harmful behavior to continue without challenge and can make those affected feel unsupported. In this sense, silence becomes a form of passive participation. It may not involve direct action, but it contributes to the outcome nonetheless. When no one speaks up, the message received is that the behavior is acceptable or at least not worth questioning. This is why the quote carries such a strong moral implication. It urges us to recognize that our inaction has consequences. Understanding this can change the way we approach difficult situations. Instead of asking, "Should I get involved?" we begin to ask, "What happens if I don't?" This shift in perspective highlights our role in shaping the environment around us. It reminds us that even small actions, such as expressing disagreement, offering support, or simply acknowledging that something is wrong, can interrupt harmful patterns and create space for change. At a broader level, this lesson extends to our role as members of a community. Every society is shaped by the collective behavior of its individuals. When people consistently choose silence over action, it creates a culture where injustice can persist. On the other hand, when individuals take responsibility for their voices and use them thoughtfully, it contributes to a culture of accountability and care. In this way, personal choices become part of a larger social impact. Ultimately, the lessons drawn from this quote challenge us to live with greater awareness and intention. They encourage us to align our actions with our values, even when it is difficult. They remind us that relationships require effort and presence, and that trust is built through consistent support. Most importantly, they emphasize that silence is not always harmless. It can carry meaning, shape outcomes, and leave lasting impressions. In the end, we are all faced with moments where our voice has the potential to make a difference. Whether we choose to use it or not defines not only how others experience us, but also how we see ourselves. In conclusion, the quote "in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends," by Martin Luther King Jr. carries a deeply profound and lasting message about human relationships, moral responsibility, and the power of our choices. It reminds us that what shapes our emotional memory is not always the obvious hostility we face, but often the quiet absence of support when we need it most. While the words of enemies may hurt in the moment, they are often expected and easier to process over time. In contrast, the silence of those we trust challenges our sense of connection, leaving behind a deeper and more enduring impact. At its core, this quote reveals an uncomfortable but important truth. Silence is not neutral. It is not simply the absence of sound or opinion. It is a response, a decision, and in many cases, a statement. When we remain silent in situations where something is clearly wrong, that silence carries meaning. It can be interpreted as indifference, avoidance, or even quiet agreement. This is why silence can sometimes be more dangerous than negative words. Words, even when harsh or unfair, are visible and direct. They can be confronted, challenged, and eventually understood. Silence, on the other hand, is subtle and ambiguous. It creates uncertainty, invites doubt, and often leaves emotional wounds that are harder to heal. The danger of silence becomes even more evident when we consider its broader impact. In personal relationships, silence can weaken trust and create emotional distance. In social settings, it can allow harmful behavior to continue unchecked. When people choose not to speak up against injustice, they unintentionally contribute to an environment where wrongdoing is tolerated. Over time, this pattern can become normalized, making it increasingly difficult for individuals to challenge it. In this way, silence does not just affect individual experience, it shapes the culture and values of entire communities. This realization calls for a shift in how we view our own role in the world. It encourages us to move beyond passive observation and take a more active stance in our relationships and in society. Being present is not enough. We must also be willing to act. This does not mean that we need to confront every situation aggressively or place ourselves in unnecessary conflict. Rather, it means recognizing when our voice matters and having the courage to use it in a thoughtful and meaningful way. On a personal level, this quote invites reflection. It asks us to consider how we respond when others are in need. Are we attentive to the struggles of those around us, or do we remain distant and uninvolved? Do we offer support when it is needed, or do we hesitate because it feels uncomfortable? These questions are not always easy to answer, but they are essential for growth. They help us understand whether our actions align with our values and whether we are contributing positively to the lives of others. Living with responsibility means being aware of the impact of both our actions and our inactions. It means understanding that even small moments where we choose to speak or stay silent can have lasting consequences. Responsibility also involves empathy, the ability to recognize when someone else is hurting and to respond with care and concern. When we combine this awareness with a willingness to act, we create opportunities to build stronger, more meaningful connections with others. Courage, too, plays a vital role in this process. Speaking up is not always easy, and it does not always lead to immediate positive outcomes. There may be situations where our voice is met with resistance or where our actions feel insignificant. However, courage is not defined by the absence of fear. It is defined by the decision to act despite it. Each time we choose to stand up for what is right, we reinforce our own sense of integrity and contribute to a culture where honesty and fairness are valued. Equally important is the idea of standing up for what is right. This principle extends beyond individual relationships and into the broader social context. It involves recognizing injustice in its many forms and being willing to challenge it, even in small ways. Standing up for what is right does not require grand gestures. Often, it is expressed through simple acts, speaking a few supportive words, refusing to accept harmful behavior, or offering help to someone in need. These actions, though seemingly small, can create a ripple effect, encouraging others to do the same. Ultimately, the message of this quote is both a warning and an invitation. It warns us about the consequences of silence, how it can damage relationships, enable injustice, and leave lasting emotional scars. At the same time, it invites us to be better, to be more aware, more courageous, and more compassionate in our interactions with others. It reminds us that we have a choice in how we respond to the world around us, and that this choice matters more than we might realize. In the end, the legacy we leave behind is not only shaped by what we say, but also by what we choose not to say. Our silence, just like our words, becomes part of how others remember us. By choosing to live with responsibility, to act with courage, and to stand up for what is right, we ensure that our presence in the lives of others is one of support rather than absence. And perhaps most importantly, we create a world where fewer people have to remember the silence of those they trusted. Thank you for spending this quiet moment with Lunar Reflections. I truly appreciate you being here and listening all the way through. If this story brought you even a little clarity or peace, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us on this journey. Now, as the day comes to an end, I hope you can let go of everything that's been weighing on your mind. Take a deep breath and allow yourself to rest. Wishing you a calm heart, a peaceful mind, and a truly restful night.